Hello and welcome to Go Vote Omaha, a production of the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Rachel M. Gibson and a member of the League and your host for today, a program we're having today on ranked choice voting. A little bit about the League. We are a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse political candidates or parties. Our main purpose is to empower voters and defend democracy. Go Vote Omaha primarily focuses on policy issues, and as a result of our discussions, we hope that you feel ready to make an informed decision during election time. Today, we are delighted to have some great guests with us to talk about ranked choice voting. We are joined today by Senator John McAllister of District 20 and Cindy Maxwell-Ostdiek, who is the president of Rank the Vote Nebraska. So with that, I'd like to just give a brief background for both of them, and then we're going to jump in with some conversation. Nebraska native Senator McAllister has worked in both the public and private sector, serving as the Metropolitan Utilities District Board of Directors, leading as the executive director of the Platt Institute for Economic Research, and since 2014 representing Central West Omaha's District 20, actually my district, in the Nebraska legislature. From the beginning of his time in the unicameral, he has been an advocate for election reform and improvement and has served on the government committee and introduced legislation to end partisan gerrymandering and also to implement ranked choice voting in certain elections. So that's our first guest, Senator McAllister.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And our second guest here is Cindy Maxwell-Ostdiek, who's originally from Iowa. She's lived in Nebraska for 30 years and is currently the president of Rank the Vote Nebraska. Her professional work has been in human resources with several Omaha companies, including TD Ameritrade and Knoll Human Resources. She's a founding member of the Nebraska Legislative Study Group and volunteers with several local nonprofits, including the Food Bank of the Heartland. So thank you to you as well.
Thank you.
Us. Yes. Well, wonderful. As we mentioned today, we are talking about ranked choice voting, and you are two excellent folks to have with us. I would love to start with just kind of an overview of what is ranked choice voting and what does it look like?
Well, sure. I'm happy to tell you. And first, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate the League of Women Voters, and I'm excited to talk about ranked choice voting. Senator McAllister is a hero for us that he brought it in our state. I think this image should be on the screen, and it's a sample ballot. When traditionally Nebraskans vote, we are faced with a binary choice when you get to the general election. But many times in the primaries, we do have many candidates running. And when we choose our candidate, we just have one choice and it's done. And many times in the past, we have had times where the winner was not a majority winner, it was plurality. And the difference between those two words is that the majority winner is 50% plus one, and a plurality winner could have more votes than everyone else, but only advance with like 25 or 30% of the vote. So when you think of it that way, 70 or 75% of the people actually voted against the winner. Mm-hmm. And we at Rank the Vote Nebraska believe we would have better results, and we have seen it across the country and in other cities our size, and states with rural and very urban. When you have a majority winner, that is because they have appealed to people from all sides. And if it is a ranked choice situation, then they can actually not only speak to their voters, but to their opponents' voters, because it may be that they would need to attract from as their second choice voting. So if you look at the sample ballot, mainly when you've traditionally voted, say for me it's Denzel Washington, is who I would vote for, and I would list him as my first choice, and possibly just go down and Jennifer Aniston second, Meryl Streep third. When everyone is done with their voting, and if no one reached 50% with ranked choice voting, the bottom vote getter, which would in this case be George Clooney, his candidacy drops out. He's lost. And anyone who chose him as their first candidate, their second choice comes into play.
So can I ask a clarifying question? So you mentioned that it's, so the first round, if they count all the ballots and someone has the 50% plus one,
Done.
we're done.
Yep.
Okay, interesting. All right, so the kind of runoff happens if that,
Exactly.
if that point is not reached. Okay.
Exactly. So you are not done until you reach 50% plus one. And yes, many times it does happen that way, where someone's the clear winner right away. But say even with George Clooney, you know, everyone's votes for second choice gets filtered up into the rest of the process. If Meryl Streep would be the person that was next, if they hadn't reached 50% plus one, she would drop out. And then those people that had her as their first candidate, their second choice would come into play.
Okay,
and
so
third,
it's kind
and
of filtering them, filtering them up. Okay, interesting.
And so that gives people opportunity to not worry about splitting their vote, or you know, when you talk about splitting the vote, or worrying about spoiler effect.
Or I've heard people use the phrase wasted vote, which hurts to hear
I know
that
it
word,
does.
but that language and that idea, it sounds like ranked choice really addresses that.
It does, because there are so many people that, you know, even don't vote, but if you do, then you want to make sure that it counts. So yeah, this is definitely a way that we believe is going to be a better way to vote.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a very helpful. I love this particular example is great. Although I still advocate my write-in would be Tom Hanks, man. So, so obviously this system is something that you all feel would be beneficial for our state, and I'd love to hear why in particular you think this would be a good fit for Nebraska.
Well, indeed so, and thank you, Rachel, and to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this show, and also for the voter packet that you do in every election. It's amazing, and it helps a lot. Why change to ranked choice voting? And there's some pretty good reasons. Citizen apathy is one reason. Low voter turnout, the toxic political situation that we have, the lack of competition that we have in elections, and lastly, the political middle of this country has been hollowed out such that we end up with two warring factions, and they call the other party an enemy. So the toxic environment that we have is a good reason to move. Political parties are problematic, as General George Washington told us at the founding of our country. And I'm so glad that I'm in a nonpartisan legislature, because I think we do better work than some of the partisan legislatures around the country. So I think there's good reason to make a change. And in some of the states, Maine and Alaska, have made those changes, so, and 17 other communities. So I think it's coming. So
Yeah, and I think we've seen a pretty high-profile example of that with the recent New York mayoral primary. So
Indeed.
in real live action, seeing how ranked choice voting works. And I think to your point, one of the more moderate candidates ended up being the ultimate winner of that race.
That's one product of ranked choice voting. You end up with more moderate candidates, just like we saw in New York City. So I think that's a beneficial effect that we need to encourage and do that in more states and more communities.
So, I mean, I think that you've highlighted some really fantastic points about the benefit of ranked choice voting. When you go out and you talk to folks, what do you find is the biggest pushbacks that you hear?
Well, Cindy has done a lot of that already, but mostly it's just a lack of understanding, and it represents a pretty major change from the way folks have been operating. And so you probably have some comment too.
Well, and I think that when Senator McAllister talks about the education piece, that is the biggest. That is the biggest. And people are sometimes resistant to change because they don't understand why it would be a better way to vote. As far as the pushback I get, when you talk to people and you kind of just describe not only how we will have candidates that are appealing more to the middle, to the broader public, but that they also have more representation. We're actually looking at other cities and other states where they have proven to have greater representation from marginalized candidates, women, people of color, Black candidates, and it's just been amazing.
So feeling like there's a place for all candidates, as opposed to it's more accessible, it almost seems,
Right.
as a candidate, not even as a voter.
Both.
Yeah.
And when you talk about New York, the satisfaction ratings by voters was very high.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, they definitely very easy. I think it was like 70% that voted, or excuse me, were polled, and they said that they thought it was easy and it was a good way to vote.
That's some really
yeah.
interesting statistics right there.
Can I just say one thing about the
Oh my
New
heavens,
York?
yes.
Okay, so
Please do.
I think that a lot of people kind of heard some of the first news and it was confusing about what was happening in New York. And actually, it was the absentee ballots. That whole process, they have rules about how long they need to be able to accept absentee ballots, and that had nothing to do with ranked choice voting. So I think sometimes the news didn't always explain it really well, and that's just another, kind of wake-up call that we all need to check our sources. But I think that in Nebraska we have great election commissioners, and the Secretary of State, they would do a good job in making sure that everyone understood that it was proper.
To your point, Rachel, it took Maine 4 years to finally introduce ranked choice voting.
Wow.
So it does take time to do that. And whether we're able to pass it this next session or not, we're going to keep working toward that goal.
Yeah.
And I think people in the long run will see the benefit of ranked choice voting.
Well, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because you did introduce a bill this session to integrate this as for some elections. And I was lucky enough to listen to some of the testimony that people brought. And I was completely struck by just the diversity of political parties, of geographic places in the state, socioeconomic status. It really was this just delightful hodgepodge of Nebraskans. So can you talk a little bit about, you've introduced this bill once, so plans to introduce it again. Where does it go from here? Where do we go from here with this?
Well, a year ago, I introduced open primaries, which would open up the primaries for independents, because right now they're shut out of all the elections, the primary elections, except for those for nonpartisan elections, such as the unicameral, Omaha City Council, the mayor of elections. So there's some bodies that have primaries that are open, but independents get shut out for the most part. And so I did open primaries last year. This year was ranked choice voting, and I think next year we're going to make it possible for cities to have ranked choice voting themselves, their choice. So we'll see if that creates some more interest in ranked choice voting.
Yeah, it sounds like a couple different approaches to really make it more accessible. And that's a very interesting point about the open primaries and the independent piece too, because at least in the latest stats I was seeing, 26% of registered Nebraskans are independents, which is a pretty decent chunk.
And it's a
right there.
growing number because of
Yeah.
the dissatisfaction with political parties. And even when you ask those people in political parties whether they totally like their party, 75% say no. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction with political parties.
Related to that, can you talk a little more about how you feel like this will kind of address that hyperpartisanship? And you alluded to this a little bit about how candidates potentially are required or needed to talk to their constituents in the system we have now versus in a ranked choice voting system.
Well, we are going to work on that education piece. And I think once people learn how it works and it gives independents a voice, I think we'll have greater acceptance and perhaps actually get a bill passed.
It's in other cities and places that this has been implemented, they have found, they've studied it, and it is less rancor, less attack, less negativity, not just from the candidates, but also the coverage. Because, we're swimming in coverage.
Yeah, right?
Yes, so as far as, needing to reach out and letting other voters know, even if I'm not your first choice, I would be a good representative because. And it really brings the opponent to be more civil. And that way they can concentrate on the policies and the actual people that they're trying to represent instead of some of this different politic.
Well, we have seen so many hit pieces, and the dirty campaigning in this state is getting out of hand. And ranked choice voting creates more civility and collaboration. And, as we talked about in New York City, we didn't see the rancor that we have in some elections that city has had.
So, and I would imagine, I was thinking back to your point about the 50% plus one, you probably would, it would be much harder to demonize any one candidate or group of people because you are going to be wanting to ask them to please vote for you for two. So there's no benefit to doing that. So everyone all voices need to be heard, or at least recognized at some point.
Yes.
It sounds like.
That is the exact reason. And okay, so someone may say these things, right, and go through an election cycle and say they're actually elected, and if they don't perform that way, the next election cycle would be, I think, eye-opening for that particular candidate. So it's not just that they would speak to those voters, but hopefully follow through and make sure with their representation that we get better solutions.
And accountability in a way almost.
Right.
That's a little different.
Well, and here in Nebraska, we have nonpartisan legislature, nonpartisan, city council here in Omaha, and the members of our group, the Rank the Vote Nebraska, and a lot of our supporters are from all parties. In fact, when we had testified at the legislature, we had people from, and people like me who are independent that were students, retired, military. It's just so important that everyone's voices be heard when we're looking at how we can help our state grow.
We look at political parties, and they're not monoliths. Not everybody is the same in the Republican Party, and not everybody is the same in the Democrat Party. There's all kinds of shades and all kinds of factions within that. And ranked choice voting gives those people participation in the election. And so I think that's a better way to go.
It does. It sounds like a fit for our state that kind of has our own, our split electoral votes, our unicameral, the little differences. It sounds like a good fit for kind of where we're already headed. So a little more of a nuts and bolts question of how this works. When we're talking about bringing legislation or next steps, are we talking about all elections? Are we talking about some? How does that work?
Well, we'll give cities of a certain size the option to do ranked choice voting if they care to. Permissive legislation. And so that way we can, corral the city council members and the mayors of these various cities and, give them the story about ranked choice voting, and maybe they'll have the option to do that if they care to.
I'm excited about that. I'm really excited about that.
So I'm curious on kind of a larger level. There's lots of conversation about national legislation related to voting and election. Is there anything in for example, the For the People Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that relates to ranked choice voting? And how does that interplay with kind of this grassroots push for this policy?
Well, and I would want to send everyone to fairvote.org and Rank the Vote Nebraska to look at the real detail, because I don't want to say this wrong. But the For the People Act includes the requirement that all new systems, new voting machines and the software would include the ability to do ranked choice voting and to tabulate it. So it doesn't require ranked choice voting of every state or city, but it would be available with the systems, so there wouldn't be that barrier. And I know here in Nebraska that our systems, I know one of our members has talked to vendors, and it is a availability with the systems that we have. So it just need to be turned on.
Right.
And I'm sure tweaked, but it is a possibility.
Right, right. Well, that's helpful context, because I think a lot of folks are very concerned about that. Where does the state level fall? Where does the federal level fall? And that clarification that it makes it available, but not necessarily mandating. It's still allowing local areas, states to choose their route to go. So I have a bigger question, especially because you're such an advocate for election integrity and systems and doing this the right way as democracy. What are some of the main things that, in addition to ranked choice voting, you feel would really benefit our electoral process?
Well, Nebraska, I need to say, does elections very well. we haven't had any criticisms that I'm aware of about the elections in Nebraska. John Gale, before Bob Evnen, Secretary of State, do a great job of conducting elections. Not only that, but the county election commissioners do a nice job. So if anybody has any questions about the integrity of elections in Nebraska, contact your county election commissioner and let them show you the process. Better than that, be an election worker. And you can see how the process actually works. So, once you've done that, you don't question the integrity of elections in Nebraska. Although I do get a few emails from other parts of the country talking about that, but Nebraska does a great job.
So there are other, I'm thinking of, for example, you brought a bill about redistricting, having an independent commission for that.
Yes.
So things of that nature, are there just broadly ways that we can continue to do an excellent job of ensuring as little partisanship as possible in those types of things?
Well, I have a good story on that, Rachel. The redistricting will start to occur in September in Nebraska. And if it doesn't go well, it's very likely we'll end up with a petition drive to make an independent commission like we have in Iowa, like Iowans have. And so, if it doesn't go well, it may be filibustered in the state Senate, but ultimately we could do an independent commission initiative drive and put it on the ballot.
Are you going to, with the League of Women Voters, be doing a lot of education about it too?
Yes, I guess I should say full disclosure. I'm on our redistricting fair maps committee for the League of Women Voters, and we were very much in support of an independent commission, just making sure that our maps are representative of our communities, and the idea of one person, one vote, and that type of thing. So yeah, we're doing tons. Thanks for the plug there. Check out our website. But redistricting is such a huge piece, and it only happens every 10 years, and so I think people don't know much about it, but it really does have those implications. So I also love that you highlighted the idea of a petition drive. I think a lot of times citizens feel like government is happening and they're not a part of it. And so, especially with ranked choice voting, if someone's watching this and getting really excited about this idea, what are some ways that they can get involved, that they can get active, that they can let folks know that this is what they want in their state?
Well, we are going to have a lot of petition drives and a lot of ballots in 22. The marijuana petition drive will occur again. Voter ID is coming up, and there's a number of additional ones. So there are a lot of reasons to go to the polls in 22, and I think these initiatives will help make that an active voting session.
Well, and I would like to just say, please join us with Rank the Vote Nebraska. We are working to educate people across the state, and we've started speaking at different organizations and helping just kind of get everybody aware of what is involved. And we have a monthly meeting the first Thursday of every month, and we have speakers. It's been Zoom. We do have Zoom.
Yeah.
But we have speakers that come and talk about how they've been successful in their locations. So, yeah.
So
And call your city council person and your state legislator. That was what I was going to say too. Sorry.
Which they listen.
Yeah.
They're nice people.
And you're a constituent.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know how I feel about this one, I suppose. Yeah. So in doing some research on ranked choice voting, I've stumbled across a couple really interesting podcasts. So if you're a podcast person, there's a podcast that's done here in Nebraska called Good Life If You Can Keep It. There's also a moderate party podcast that's done by someone, I believe she's in California, and she's had a couple Nebraskans on to talk about ranked choice voting. So those are, if you're curious and you want to listen while you're, mowing the lawn or whatever it might be, those are some great ones. Are there other things that you would suggest, books or websites or podcasts or things that that if people are trying to get their head around this might be helpful to listen or look at?
Well, we're always trying to share sources, and so we do have that on our website, and fairvote.org, I said their site before, that is a really good source too. And we can certainly put a link, if this is on YouTube, we can put a link in the comments.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
I was going to say, please do listen to those podcasts.
Yeah, they're a hoot and a half.
Some of our friends from Rank the Vote Nebraska are involved with them.
Yes,
So,
wonderful.
They're amazing.
Well, I know that we're getting close to time here, so I want to, before we kind of wrap up, just ask if there's anything that I should have asked you that I haven't, or anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make sure gets heard.
I'd say ranked choice voting really fits the Nebraska ethic. I mean, the fact that we have a nonpartisan legislature would seem to give us a boost in our effort to make this law. So I'd encourage people to check it out and maybe even come testify when we introduce that bill next January.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
I second.
Yeah.
I second what Senator McAllister said, and I think that any time that you can get involved with, even if you're not registered, get registered to vote, and then make sure and get in touch with your elected officials, because if you're not in touch with them, they don't know what you need and what you want.
Right. And I'll just give a quick plug. You can live stream the legislature once it's in session. So again, if you're doing stuff around the house and you just want to hear the conversation, if the legislature's website is always kind of fun to see. Well, if you're like me and find this stuff interesting, it's fun to see what's being covered for the day. So.
Yes, definitely.
Well, as we're rounding up here on time, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come chat with us. We appreciate that you all are champions in this area and formally in our legislature and advocating and helping people know about the process. Just very many thanks. So with that, we will include some of those links that you mentioned on our website, and I would love to thank our watchers tonight for taking the time to spend some time with us. A huge thank you again to Senator McAllister and Cindy Maxwell-Ostdiek. For the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha, I am Rachel Gibson, reminding you to inform yourself about issues and candidates, and at election time, be ready to go vote Omaha. So always check out our website and educate yourself, and never hesitate to reach out to your elected officials or to us.